Hello and welcome to the Leading Lounge. I'm your host, Dr. Justin Dubose. Here in the Leading Lounge, we talk with today's leaders and unpack lessons learned and being learned from a career of leading and communicating in their field. These conversations are designed to be both informal and informative, and we want to equip you with wisdom and tools to empower you as a leader where you are and where you want to be. Okay, tell me what you think of when I say these words. My pleasure. The Lord's Chicken. You thought of it too, didn't you? Chick-Fil-A. Chick-Fil-A does a great job of consistently delivering amazing customer service and a really good product. And that doesn't happen without really good people and really good leaders. So today's guests, there were two of them. First time I've interviewed two people. Both work for Chick-Fil-A. So they've got to work in a high-paced environment with a lot of demand, with customer service, tons of moving parts, a lot of people. And, oh, by the way, they also have to lead their people that are carrying out these incredible functions at high speeds, with lots of demands coming at them. And, oh, by the way, in their case, these two people happen to be married to one another. So it's a pretty fascinating dynamic going on. So here on the Leading Lounge, we interview our A's, B's, and C's, administrators, bosses, and churches. And today was two bosses, Javonna and Jeremy Roach. Javonna is an operating partner for two stores here in Texas where I live, and Jeremy manages one of those. And altogether, they have about 170 team members. And Javonna works with directly with 8, and Jeremy works directly with 6. So they've got this added dynamic of working together. So how do you deal with work-life balance? They also have kids, and so in the middle of all the work stuff, they're trying to shuttle kids back and forth, and, where does work stop and home begin, and how do you communicate with one another when you're wired very differently, and you have these different roles at work. And anyway, it was very, very fascinating and a real blessing to be able to sit down with them, and I know it'll be a blessing to you to listen to the wisdom that they have to give. And in the case of this one, this was a live interview, so I drove to their office and interviewed them, so the sound is maybe not as great as if it was all, through the computer, through Zoom or something, but you can still hear them just fine. So I know today's going to be a blessing for you, listening to them, listening to their story. It's really fun. So be blessed by this. Pick up some tools, pick up some wisdom to help you where you are. So here you go. Have fun. All right. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Leading Lounge. I'm here in their office with Jeremy and Javonna Roach, who manage and run and oversee a couple of Chick-Fil-A stores and a whole bunch of employees. And the interesting thing about them is they're also married to one another. So I'm glad thank you guys for agreeing to do this and talk through not just some of the professional stuff, but also with being married to one another in these leadership roles, kind of how that affects your relationship or how you guys balance each other out or those kinds of things. So however you guys want to answer this in terms of who goes first, who goes second, interrupting each other, whatever, it's all good. So I'll just start the first question. So can you please tell us about what you do, how you guys would define your leadership role, and about the teams of people you lead?
Okay, so I'll start because I actually started at Chick-Fil-A first.
Mm-hmm.
So I started working at Chick-Fil-A in 2000. I was a junior in high school. I had no clue that this was going to be my long-term job. I went to college and did get a degree in science. And so I thought I was going to be a science teacher. Mm-hmm. And the Lord had different plans. So I taught science for a little while, and I was a volleyball coach as well. And then I went back to Chick-fil-A. And I really think that the Lord had a plan the whole time. I just didn't see it from the very beginning. Mm-hmm. And so I started working at Jeremy's store. He was the GM at Fairmont Parkway. And I think that was in what year was that? 2005. No, it wasn't 2005 because we got married in 2006. Yeah.
So it was after that.
Yeah, so that'd be like 2008. I started working back at Jeremy's store. And then my dad got really sick with brain cancer. And so I ended up moving back to Baytown store and I've had many different leadership roles over the course of 20 years. Currently, my newest role is I'm called operating partner. So really what that means is that I oversee the operations of 2 stores, and I have a leadership team of 8.
Okay.
Now our total store count is about 170 employees.
Wow.
But my leadership team that directly works underneath me. So the owner of the restaurant, he's my boss. And then there's me. And then I have a team of 8 people. And Jeremy is on that team of 8
Okay.
people.
So you pretty much just work with those 8 people.
Yes.
And,
I work with those. Yes.
Yeah.
I work with those 8. And then I also work with our director team, which is a team of 9. So if you want to say both of those groups of people, but really like my direct reporting people are a group of 8 people.
Okay.
And I would say defining my leadership role. So we've only had 2 restaurants for 9 months. So we were at one restaurant. We opened our second location 9 months ago. Jeremy actually runs that location. And I would say like my newest leadership role is really just people, like making sure that, people run our whole organization. So you can have great systems and processes, but if you don't have great people running those systems and processes, you won't run a great business.
Exactly.
And so for me, I just focus on people. I have a lot of conversations. I have a lot of meetings. People say meetings are boring. I actually really like meetings because you can see progress and where you're going. But that's currently my role is really people, dealing with people.
Yeah, I think it's important. There's an interview that's actually going to get released after yours, but I've interviewed a guy who used to be a pastor, now is a district superintendent for the Alliance, for our denomination. And he said his wife used to tease him of like, do you even work? Like all you do is have coffee with people. You know, you're just like talking to people all the time. But his answer was, no, that is the work, like in working with people. So. Anyway, all right. So Jeremy, how would you answer that?
Yeah. So, I've got a team of 6 directors that, really that's my job they're the hands and feet of the restaurant. They're in there, they're working with the team members every day. They're working with the guests every day. They're running our systems. And like she said, if we don't have good people, running the system's just a system and it's not going to be done well. And, that's been the adjustment for, my role is kind of as I've stepped back a little bit, and it's my job to coordinate what they do and what our store does every day. It's been very challenging to step, like I said, taking that step back and trying to help them grow to where they're leading the store, they're leading the teams, they're leading the shifts, they're leading the day parts. And I'm just helping coordinate and trying to help them grow and grow myself to see the bigger picture and to see kind of operations overall. So it's a lot different from when I started. Like she said, we started long time ago, and it was different. Then you could control everything from you could work a spot up front and run the whole store from there with smaller volumes and smaller teams. And
right.
One of the things we realize now is that with these larger teams and larger volume and more guests per hour, you have to have a team working well underneath you, or you won't be able to get what you want done.
So if you guys had to guess or estimate, sounds like a lot of what you do is not, you oversee operations, but you're not like oiling machines. You're just like almost coaching people or leading or giving them bigger perspective on stuff. Is that fair?
Yeah. So we're like the visionaries.
Okay.
I guess is what you would say is we have a vision of what we want things to look like, and what we want guest experience to look like, what we want financials to look like. We have that overarching vision, and we cast that vision to our team, and then our teams are the people who kind of execute that vision. Now they do have say in what's going on. But we also do work on machines, and we also do bread chicken, and we also do bagged food. And I think that's important because one of the ways I think that society's kind of gotten away from like that. I would say they call them managers. We call them leaders. There's a difference between the two, but a manager is so hands off. They're not part of the daily operations. But I think that's kind of where we've lost a little bit, is that your team doesn't see you doing the same exact things that they do every day. And so we still do work in operations, because I think in order for them to serve well, we have to serve them well.
Sure.
And so serving our team it looks different. Yeah, we do have a lot of meetings and we talk a lot, and we, that's the basis of what we do. But also we get in there and make it happen as well, especially when we have like big orders or we did a free breakfast for the last month. So every Tuesday we did free breakfast. I worked every free breakfast. I was bagging chicken. I was in the kitchen making, biscuits and things like that. So I think it's important for your team to still see that you want to be a part of those things,
right?
In order for your team to function well,
right?
Well, and the relationships of the team, like a lot of the people in the store, I did interview and I did hire a lot of them, and so I know a little bit about them, and to help start the relationship with them. And I miss it when I'm not in there as much during the week. It's like I feel like, what's going on in your life? Like I haven't talked to these people. Like where you at? How's it going? Like what are you doing? I miss that part of the job. So I do try to make a point to be able to get in there and interact with the team as much as we can, because again, we do have a lot of team members who want anybody to fall through the cracks, and want to give everybody attention and try to engage with them.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to read the next question, but then I want you to tell me, because I'm really interested, like how Chick-fil-A, how the cow brought you two together. So the question is that you guys have this added dynamic of leading together. You already talked about the kind of your work relationship together, but so the question is, how do you balance your professional roles of leading and your private roles of marriage and family life? But before you answer that, like you guys met at Chick-fil-A, right?
Yes.
Correct.
So how did the spark happen?
So we are what's called a Chick-fil-A-ship. Everyone loves that term. We've had a ton of Chick-fil-A-ships.
Did you make up that term?
Yes.
Oh, you got to copyright that thing or something.
So we're a Chick-fil-A-ship. When I started, so Jeremy started when he was 18 and I was 16. So I started before Jeremy. And we were just friends in the beginning. We both went off to separate colleges. He was working at a Chick-fil-A in Oklahoma. When he was in Oklahoma. I didn't work when I was in Mississippi because that's where I went to college, because I played volleyball. So I couldn't work and play volleyball,
right.
But every break. So, I would come back. I'd call my managers and be like, hey, can I come back? Like, I just need to work for a month. And that's how I saved all my money every summer, winter, spring break. I'd save it all. And that's how I would make it through college.
Yeah.
But this last, right before I graduated college, I called the store, and I actually had a teaching job. And so I called the store and I was talking to one of the leaders, and I was like, hey, I already have this teaching job, but I need to work this summer because.
So were you teaching at home?
No. Yes. I was coming back to teach.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I was coming back to teach. And I already had a teaching job, but I didn't want to sit around all summer, and I needed money. So I called him and I was like, hey, I have a teaching job, but I need money and I would love to come back and work at Chick-fil-A. And the leader was like, oh yeah, it's totally possible. And at the end of the conversation, and this is probably really weird, he said, hey, do you remember that guy, Jeremy Roach? He's coming back this summer too. And this is right before they opened the new restaurant. So we would be coming back in June, and then they were going to open a new restaurant in September.
Now, is this the same operator?
Not my current operator. It was a previous operator.
Okay.
And I said, oh, that's interesting. They said, yeah, he's graduating from college. He's going to help us run the new freestander, because we were in a mall location. Mm-hmm. And to run a mall, just to give you perspective, takes about 15 to 20 employees.
Okay.
To run a freestander at that time took about 60 employees.
Okay.
And we call them team members. But so he was coming back to help run that location. And I was like, that's really interesting. And this is one of the several times in my life where the Lord has audibly told me, hey, you're going to marry this guy. So I hung the phone up, and this is weird. I know this is weird. And I hadn't dated all throughout college. And so I hung up the phone. I called my mom, and I'm like, hey mom, do you remember that guy, Jeremy Roach? And she was like, oh yeah, I remember him. And I said, yes. And I said, he's coming back to Chick-fil-A this summer. And I just was talking to one of the leaders on the phone, and I was telling him how I was going to come back, and he's coming back this summer. And she's like, oh, that's awesome. Like what? You're giving me some information, but what's this all about? And I said, well, the Lord just told me that we're going to get married. And my mom was like, that's weird. Like, don't tell anybody else that.
That would be my response too.
So anyway, so that summer, come back to work. He comes back to work, and in about July, and back then the uniform was really bad, like really bad. And so I thought, how do I get this guy to notice me? Because I am wearing the worst uniform, but we had volleyball in common. He played club volleyball at school and I played college volleyball. And so we kind of talked through it, but ended up, we went to church together. I went to his church for a week and I said, hey, I'm going to come to your church tomorrow. We have a mutual friend who it's their birthday. And he came to church that same day. He asked me on a date and we got married. We got married 6 months later. So that's kind of our Chick-fil-A story.
That's fun. Yeah, that's cool. So, all right. So you got married in 2006?
Yes.
And been working together? Like,
it was off and on a little bit there for a little bit. Like I said, when her dad was sick, it was a little off and on, but fully been working together for
12 years.
Yeah. Something like that.
Okay. So how do you balance that? Because I'm just picturing if I'm you, working in 2 different locations with me and Elena is already kind of difficult enough to bring work stress home. But you guys are bringing the same work stress home. And it's like, I don't know, how do you separate it? How do you deal with that?
Well, and you're assuming that we do, which we appreciate that. I think as we talk, like this might be one of our toughest, life challenges that we're just going to face daily. Mm-hmm. And I think as the work stuff goes well, it's easier to do. When work stuff is more challenging or have issues or working through things, it gets more challenging at home as well to get that pressure additive in there. But it's a thing, like we talk about it. It's like there's times where I'm like, hey, like I'm at home, I don't want to talk about work, like let's leave it there. Mm-hmm. But then there's something big going on. It's coming home and so there's kind of always that struggle with it. It's kind of, like I said, in phases. Sometimes we do real well with it. Sometimes it gets a little bit harder.
Yeah.
I think one of our biggest lessons, though, that we learned, so we did a small group study maybe like 6 or 7 years ago. It was our first ever time to join a small group at a church. Mm-hmm. And it was a marriage study. And one of the things that we learned or that was kind of brought to our attention is like, if you marry a good-willed person, their intention is not to like hurt you or harm you or to really make you feel less than. And we talk about that still all the time of like, when he hurts me at work or when I hurt him at work or when he hurts me at home or I hurt him at home, like it's inevitable. We're mm-hmm. humans, right? We're going to hurt each other. We have different perspectives. His way to run a restaurant and my way to run a restaurant, 2 completely different things. Like mm-hmm. we even talk about that. It's like the way I would have done that and the way you just did that, not right. It's not the same. But at the end of the day, we love each other and we know that we're good-willed people and that our intentions are not to harm each other. Mm-hmm. And so when we do mess up, like we talk about it. Okay, hey, when you did this, like that didn't make me feel loved. Or when I wasn't feeling loved when you did something that way. And then at the end of the day, it's just, we talk about it and then we kind of move on from it.
Yeah.
And we've learned that we do love each other and we are good-willed people and we want what's best for each other. We want what's best for our kids and our family. So at the end of the day, when we do things to hurt each other, it's probably not intentional.
Yeah.
And so I think that was one of our biggest lessons of like, we use that every day almost of like when I do things because I'm loud and he's quiet. And mm-hmm. when I like confrontation, the way I like to be confronted is like on spot, you did this wrong, and very direct. And I'm like, okay, I can work on that. I can fix that. The way he likes to be confronted is in private, not loud.
Right.
A little more soft.
Right.
And so I sometimes confront him at work in a way that he doesn't like.
Right.
It happened actually very recently. And afterwards he goes, I hate it when you do X, Y, or Z. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. Like I shouldn't have done it that way. So.
Yeah, I can see how that'd be tough. We have a list of family values on the wall at home, 10 family values. And one is, API is what we'll say, but it's assume positive intent. And it's like, don't just assume that someone meant to whatever. So
that really helps.
Yeah.
You think about that.
It does. Yeah. And my kids from time to time will be like, API, Dad, API.
That's great.
I love that.
So no, that's key. And I think you're right. I think you're onto something really important when it's not something that you solve. Like it's just, it's going to be like an ongoing
Something you're going to face.
Yeah. And so you just constantly communicate with one another and give one another the benefit of the doubt and that kind of thing. So, all right. Good deal. Okay. So one of the focuses of the podcast is on communicating. I'd love to hear tips from people on how you communicate, what you've learned from both good experience and bad experience. And, failure is one of the things that everyone can identify with. So one of the questions I like to ask people and hear them answer is, and this is for both of you, either together or individually, is just, can you tell us about a time when you failed at communicating and what you learned from it? And how did it change your approach to communication, if at all?
Well, I'm going to tell you one time, I can tell you about a million times, because that's just a constant. We do well when we sync up on Sunday and plan our week. And it's like, we've got a good solid plan. Who's picking up who, who's going in when, what do you have going on? We've got a Google Calendar and we put stuff in there. We do well when we sync up like that. If there's a week where we don't have a solid plan and we don't go all the way through it, there's times where I'm calling like, hey, what are you thinking for dinner? And she's like, I haven't even thought that far. And I'm like, well, I'm starving. So like, that's going to be a problem. And so, but I tell you what, the one thing I've learned throughout our relationship is that, even if I have a plan that's not great, I can't stray from the plan or it messes her up. Yeah. It's like, I'm like, well, I just called an audible and did this because that made sense. And she's like, you changed your plan. You didn't tell me you changed your plan. And I was like, I didn't know that was a rule. I didn't know that's what I had to do. And so that's caused some ripples, many, many times. So that's something I've learned that, man, if I'm going to change the plan, I got to communicate that first.
Right. Don't just do it and deal with the fallout.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'll talk a little bit more about business communication since he talked to you about our personal communication. And I don't know if this is hard for most businesses, but I'm assuming it is that because we have so many forms of communication gets lost. We talk about communication every single meeting I'm ever in. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, was that communicated? Well, was that communicated clearly? Mm-hmm. So communication is tough. And I think that the more simple you make communication, the easier it is to communicate. Mm-hmm. So for me, and I told my leaders, we just had this conversation on Tuesday we have an executive meeting once a month, and that's the team of people that I lead. And I told them, I said, we're not going to ever feel free at home if we don't figure out how to communicate better, because I'm getting text messages, phone calls, Slack messages. That's our form of communication mm-hmm. here. Emails. I mean, constantly. Yep. And so there's never a moment where I can detach from communication, or if they send me a message and it's like, okay, I can get to that tomorrow, I've forgotten about it because I've read it and I'm saying, okay, let me get back to them. But then I don't get back to them because I don't do it at that moment. And so it almost feels like you're a slave to your phone mm-hmm. and to communication. Right. Because in the past you had to communicate well because you didn't have a phone that you could be consistently communicating on.
And people couldn't just blow you up with stuff at the moment they thought about it.
Correct. Yeah. And so I think what that has done for us as a society is that it's caused us to be unclear, because now that we can communicate any moment we feel like it, we don't really have to communicate with clarity because there's an ongoing conversation about whatever it is.
Yeah. So I sent you that text, remember?
Yes. And so I think clarity is probably the biggest issue in communication. Yeah. We have a little acronym that we use at work that's called ESRC. So expectations, skills, resources, consequences. And I think for me that my biggest area of opportunity is clear expectations, mm-hmm. because I assume that people are going to do it the way I would, which is a bad assumption. Right. So if you were to send me a text message, normally I respond pretty much right then, or I figure out I dig into whatever details you need and I go ahead and respond. Well, not everyone does that. Right. And so when I give expectations to my team, if I say, hey, I need y'all to get this done, I don't say I need you to get this done when you need to get it done, how maybe a couple guardrails of how it needs to be done. I just say, hey, go get it done. Mm-hmm. That's good communication to me because I'll go get it done. It'll be today. You don't have to worry about it. Like, but for my leaders, most of them, it's like, well, I already have a list of 10 other things to do.
Yep.
And so they'll put it on the bottom of the list. And so then when I go back to them, I'm like, hey, did you get such and such done? And they're like, no. And then I go back and say, okay, did I give clear expectations?
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of times my communication issues are just clear expectations of like, hey, I need this done by Friday.
Yep.
And so now I've really worked on when I say, hey, who's going to do this? So when we create an action plan, who's going to do this? Okay, when are they going to get it done by? Okay, are there any guardrails we need to talk about to making sure that that gets done well?
Right.
So that we don't waste time, because I think that's the other issue with communication is there's so much wasted time in communication.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we don't communicate clearly, we've done it one time. Okay, well, it wasn't done well. Okay, so now somebody else has to go do it.
Right.
So your productivity even goes down at
Mm-hmm.
that point. I just was listening to a podcast recently. I don't even remember which one it was, but they were talking about how they've set guardrails on how they actually communicate. And so like for email, they said to be most productive with email, you should check it twice a day, like once in the morning or like once when you get to work and once when you leave work, instead of checking it
Like every 10 minutes.
every 10 minutes. You're actually a lot more productive if you set some guardrails around how you communicate. So we've been working on doing that at work because we have stuff fall through the cracks all the time.
Yeah.
And it typically is because of poor communication.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I had to sit down with some people and talk about, so you were talking about like if you just don't set the expectations, your expectation is it gets done today, and theirs might be that it gets done Friday.
Mm-hmm.
So I had this conversation recently, but within the last few days with somebody about incongruent priorities. I'm like, this might be like on a 1 to 10 scale, this might be like a 7 for me. So if this is like a 4 or lower for you, like if this is really important, you got to let me know. So that, because otherwise I'm going to put it on the back burner and it might be 2 weeks because it's just not that big of a deal to me. So,
right.
So yeah, that's hard too. You got 58 ways to communicate, and for you it's a 1, and to them it's a 10. So, okay, good stuff. All right, one of my favorite questions to hear people's answers on is: if the present you could visit with the younger you, what advice about leadership would you give yourself?
This was pretty simple for me, but it's not about me, and which is a challenge in this world, especially, I feel like selfishness is just absorbed society in so many aspects. And it's been a real challenge for myself to put myself second. But it's not about me. It's about our team. Like I said, previous years, I could do everything. I could manage everything. I could control everything. And now it's just much more bigger than that. You have to have a team. Mm-hmm. It's not about me. It's about what my team can do. That's something I wish I would have learned earlier. And then the other thing is never stop growing. There's something that, at one point in my life and certain amount of arrogance, I felt like I knew everything and, didn't need any more growth. Right. And, only to come to find out how wrong that really is. Right. So, never stop growing. Whatever I'm saying here is because of something I've heard recently and learned. So, never stop growing, and it's not all about me. Yeah.
Good stuff.
So Jeremy and I actually talked through this question quite a bit. And we talked about a lot of different things, but it ended up coming down to, it's not about me. I think in the past, and because I'm a very driven person, that a lot of what I do becomes who I am. Mm-hmm. And so I would say, okay, if I can hit this next position, or, if I can do this thing, then, that would make me a better person. And I would say the older I get, the more I realize it's not about me, and it's about, and this may be, some people would call it a churchy answer, but like, it's about the Lord and like what he's done in you. And when I'm not walking with the Lord, because, we all have ebbs and flows mm-hmm. in our relationships with God. When I'm not walking with the Lord, it's painful to be around me because I'm so demanding, and I've got like all these things going on, and I always want to get better. And I want, like, we got to push, we got to get where we're headed. But when I'm walking with the Lord, it's almost like he takes me a step back and says, okay, Javonna, it's not about you. It's not about what you can accomplish. What can you achieve? Or even like how much you're doing. Yeah. It's more about the people around you and the relationships that you're building for the kingdom. Yeah. And so I think the most important thing that I wish I would have known in my early 20s is that all these things that are accomplishments, I guess is what you would say, they're not even that important.
Yeah.
Like that's not what life is about. Life is about building relationships with people so that they can see Jesus inside of you and building the kingdom. So
Yeah, exactly. Well, your answer to this question might be the same as that one was asked. But if you could pass on one lesson, could be about leadership, could be about just anything, any one lesson to our audience, what would it be?
Yeah, and you're right. It is pretty similar. We did talk about this. There's more to it than you. And again, that's, when you're young and you're on top of the world and, you're engulfed in, hey, where am I headed? Where am I on track for? What am I doing? It's easy to be so self-absorbed that you're just thinking about what's going on in your life. And like she said, as you get older, that does get easier, to think outward. But for sure, it's like, you've got to see down the road. You've got to see that there's something bigger out there than yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do figure that out and experience it, it's inspiring. It's inspiring to me when I see team members that have grown from when we hired them to where they're at now, or to even if they leave and go and make an upward move to another
Mm-hmm.
career. It's inspiring to see that growth, and there's more to it out there than just yourself.
Yeah.
I would say that's a hard question to answer because it does go into the, if you could visit your present self.
Mm-hmm.
So that is, I would say, the biggest lesson. But I think the second biggest lesson is that relationships are so important. And the things you say and the ways that you react and the things that you do with relationships that's like the backbone of everything in your life. And kind of like he said, like sometimes we get a team member that comes in and they have never felt loved in their entire life.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that because our mission for Chick-Fil-A is to be the world's most caring company.
Yeah.
And so when they start receiving care from us, it's almost like they don't even know how to receive it. And sometimes it's even like a negative response of like, wait, like what? Like y'all are like trying to love on me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
they're waiting for whatever the ulterior motives are.
Yeah.
Behind
right.
it. Yeah.
And I like those moments, those relationships that I get to build with people, they change me. Like they change who I am. And, a lot of times I go in with like, okay, well, how can I help this person? When in reality, like the lessons that I learn with them help me
Mm-hmm.
grow so much as an individual. So I really work on relationships with people and really, I want to see people feel loved.
Yeah.
I think that's a big thing is that, a lot of people just don't even know what that looks like. And we come into contact with a lot of those people
Mm-hmm.
of, they're not feeling loved at home or, they don't have love in their marriage. And so how can we, and I know we cook chicken, that's another, like, well, how do you do, but Truett Cathy, the founder of Chick-Fil-A, he says it's not about the chicken, it's about people.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the relationships that we can build. And so I would say build relationships, like make sure that you're consistently building relationships. And that takes a lot of effort on your part.
Yep.
Like it's not like it's going to come to you.
Right.
You can't just sit back and wait to build relationships. You have to go out there and actively seek to build relationships.
And it's kind of like you were talking about with your marriage, like communication. It's not something you solve and then you're just done. Like it's just, you're always doing it with those people, new people, so yeah. And I found too that like, if you focus on the tasks or the processes or climbing the ladder or whatever, is you're trying to get things like greater workplace satisfaction, more productivity, better retention, all that. And you actually get all those things better if you just focus on the people in the first place.
Yeah.
So. And you guys do a good job of it, man. I wanted to affirm that for both of you, that you guys are really, really good leaders. Like just seeing on the peripheries, like how you interact with your folks, like the ones you bring to church or, like in the one meeting I was in with you guys, like you guys have great influence and your 170 or whatever employees obviously think highly of you, look up to you, enjoy working for you. So,
Well, thanks for that.
Yeah, I mean, you're doing a good job making a family atmosphere and all that. So. All right. Well, appreciate both of you. Thanks for letting me come hang in your office
Yeah.
for a little bit. Yeah.
Thanks,
And sit down and pick your brain. So, all right. Appreciate you guys listening in, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us today. The Leading Lounge is brought to you by Communicate to Care, where we are building better leaders by building better people. For more information, visit us online at www.communicatecare.com. This is your host, Dr. Justin Dubose, and we'll see you next time, right here in the Leading Lounge.